Hi guys, welcome back to another video. I already have a drawing underway because I started filming and realized that my memory card wasn't in, so I'm just going to pick up from here and yeah, let's go from here. So this is a drawing of the Chatter Cenobite from Hellraiser. About a month ago there was an reveal trailer for an upcoming horror game based on the Hellraiser universe, which is called Hellraiser Revival, and I love the Hellraiser universe, and I'm kind of a big Clive Barker fan. I've read most all of his books, at least the adult ones. You know, the Hellbound Heart, I think, well, I guess it wasn't my first novel I read of his, but this one stuck with me. It's a short little novella. It's called The Hellbound Heart, and that is where Pinhead and all those characters come from. And it was pretty important for the time in which it came out. It kind of highlighted a sort of alternative scene. It brought light to maybe the BDSM type crowd for those who were unawares, and just sort of body modifications in that whole movement in general, which, you know, has sort of become a lot more mainstream now, at least with tattoos and piercings. But for the time, that was it was a big deal. And the characters, you know, the Cenobites really aren't the evil characters. This would become a trope later in horror movies, that the monsters weren't as evil as the people. But, you know, again, at the time, that was a newer concept, and it was really well executed. You know, the Cenobites, they kind of just come to do their job and punish those who are too lustful and you know, just prone to sin by temptation, and they're just doing their job. And obviously Pinhead is the most famous of the Cenobites, but I always preferred the Chatter. I thought he was a really cool concept, and, you know, I've been drawing him a little bit. I did this watercolor painting a little while ago, which I actually really like how this turned out. This was kind of supposed to be the white space is kind of the room opening, because the Cenobites always enter seemingly through a room in which lustful acts are taking place. And so I kind of did blood on the floorboards down here. And then I did a drawing on black paper, much like I'm doing now. And this I used the brush on charcoal that I sanded down. And it turned out okay. But it's kind of harder to get detail when you have the brushed on stuff. It's just harder to go over it once that's happened. I used silver leaf here to kind of, for the lip hooks, which is a iconic trait of the Chatter, is his lips are pulled back to reveal his teeth, which are kind of in a constant state of chattering. And that's kind of the concept of the Cenobites in general, is that they are in a perpetual state of pain and agony. And so all their body modifications are to sort of highlight that pain that they're in for eternity, for whatever sins they committed or whatever lustful acts they really, you know, and these lustful acts they're not just like sleeping with people. Usually it's people who are like murdering a partner to get with another one, or plotting it, things like that. So it's just kind of about the road that love takes people on, and how that road can sometimes be really damaging. And for that, I think it's actually a really good horror franchise, because it tackles a theme in a clever way, which you'd expect from a great author, that maybe a lot of horror movies don't approach. But the Hellraiser game, much to I think everyone's surprise, is a single player affair, which is super cool, because these days companies like to make multiplayer games with the hope that people will continue playing them and buy things to keep playing that game. It's a more sustainable business model in their mind. And, well, it's maybe a better business model for companies. On the consumer side, it kind of feels like we don't get complete experiences. We get experiences that feel like they are a blueprint for something that will come later. And so it is exciting, in my opinion, that we are getting a just single-player game, because that should be something that ships pretty much ready to launch in a semi-good state. The chatter was kind of the main Cenobite actually featured in the trailer, so maybe I was drawn to him because it seems like that's the direction that the game's going. And the more I've been sort of drawing the Cenobites and just, drawing characters that are already established is sort of an interesting endeavor, because you start to realize maybe some of the reasons or logic behind the design choices that the original creators made. And, it's hard not to notice when you are drawing these characters just how much it looks like Resident Evil really pulled from them. And that's not a bad thing. Inspiration, it's good. But when we look at the tyrants and just overall some of the scariest creations in the Resident Evil universe, they tend to be walking around with faces often kind of mangled like this, with scar tissue and, just a look of perpetual pain there on them, while also being, donning leather. That goes for Nemesis, that goes for Mr. X, and I just you almost couldn't convince me now that they weren't inspired by Hellraiser in the 80s and 90s. And, all the better for it, in my opinion. Lately I've been playing Alien Isolation, which, if you guys have watched in my previous videos, you know that I always talk about that I'm trying to play this game. But I just finished Chapter 5, which I feel like is kind of a monumental moment in this game. It's kind of your first big encounter with the Xenomorph. I got back into it because the show Alien Earth is out. And so far I am liking Alien Earth. I know that some people have, it's met criticism, and that's fair. Everybody's going to have their opinions. It just means that it matters to people, which is cool. But I'm not exactly sure what people want from their media. It's kind of hard to, a show compared to a movie, they are stretching the story out, or maybe stretching is not even the right word. They are making a story that is going to last, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes. Not exactly sure for Alien Earth. And so it's not going to be at the breakneck speed that an hour and 20-minute horror movie is. I, in fact, am liking some of the slow burn aspects. There's some stuff that I have a really hard time with, but I'm just chalking it up to, the acting is still pretty good, even if the dialogue can be cheesy. But in the show, they basically have a altered carbon sort of deal going on, if you know what altered carbon is, whether it's the book or the show that was on Netflix. And they're effectively transplanting human consciousness of those who might die or weak into synthetic beings. And in the universe, they describe that, children, maybe teenagers, about as old as it gets, humans, just especially as you become adult, don't have an agile enough mind to accept that transplantation process. And so they have these kids in adult bodies, and these synthetic bodies that are really capable. And it means some of the conversations at times can be maybe a little excruciating. Maybe that's the proper word, because it is adults talking and reasoning like kids in scenarios that they don't fully understand because they are kids, you know, like maybe a xenomorph is hanging out in the next room over and they're saying like, bro, what are you doing, bro? And yes, that does feel a little ridiculous. But, you know, I'm just gonna have to eat some of the good with the bad there, because some of the horror stuff that's going on, so far they're not really focusing on the xenomorph. They're kind of focusing on the experimentation that comes from the xenomorph DNA, I guess. And I'm not entirely sure all of it is xenomorph DNA, but there's some weird experiments going on. And I just think those are kind of cool ways to iterate on this concept that we've now had in our cultural film zeitgeist for, I don't even know, was Alien come out 70 something? And Geiger's drawings even before then, the Necronomicon. So either way, I'm going to sit back and enjoy the fact that they get Alien content, and I'm not going to do any complaining about it because I just want it to keep happening, whether it's games, movies, comics, whatever. They also seem like they're kind of trying to do a Blade Runner tie-in universe with the Tyrell Corporation, who makes the synthetic peoples in the Blade Runner universe. And, you know, I think that's alright, I guess. So the Chatterer doesn't typically have an eyeball. He kind of actually has like scar tissue, like of the nerves pulled across his face, sort of like how I did on this one. But I wanted to see what he looked like with an eye, if you're making eye contact. And you know, it's hard for me to tell from here, to be honest. I'm up close enough that I don't really get a good vantage of just what it looks like. I was going to keep rolling with it. Trying to add in all these random lines and then contrast areas right next to them to just indicate really damaged tissue. And overall I still feel like it's just too bright of a drawing, so I'm going to knock it all down a little with this brush, just kind of evenly reduce. Saving the teeth, that's kind of the big reveal, obviously. I also pre-ordered Chronos New Dawn, which I haven't pre-ordered a game in I don't even know how long. But this past week, there's been a lot of gameplay and things like that posted on YouTube. Alright guys, welcome back. As you can see, I've progressed quite a lot here in adding some details to the Chatterer, and you know, overall that was sort of the goal of what I was going here for, was to just practice adding lots of texture again and kind of just seeing what the paper gave me along the way. And I think in that regard it was a fun project. I don't know that it necessarily lands as well as the original Chatterer. The eyeball was probably not, you know, everything I was hoping that it would be. But that's okay. You know, that's the whole point of drawing and iterating, just to see what design choices they made and why. And I do think he probably looks a little freakier without the eye. I might add in, make it more of a little bust here. This doesn't look like it's the proper size anymore, though, now that I've drawn out his head and neck. I'm going to put some links in the description to my social medias and websites in case you guys want to check out other art, or you can think about if you want some for yourself. There's a lot of cool upcoming stuff coming up in the gaming world in terms of especially horror. Chrono's New Dawn at the beginning of September here, which is only like, maybe a week and a half away. At the end of September, there's Silent Hill F. So there's some cool stuff coming out that, you know, I will hopefully get to and be able to draw and talk about a little bit. But if you can think of anything else that you guys like to see drawn, characters from your favorite games, films, books, what have you, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.